All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. Greg Helbeck, Michael Pinter here, coming to everyone's ears and maybe eyes if they're watching on YouTube, if we even have this on YouTube. But today we're going to talk about rental properties in New York. And Michael has more rentals than I do. I have a few right now. I have some interesting experiences with it. I'm sure Michael has the same. And the big thing we're going to make in this episode here is that a lot of gurus will talk about rental property investing in other areas of the country that are not high-end areas like New York or California or Seattle. And they're talking about these numbers that are just basically from Fantasy Island in our area or any high-end area, honestly. So we're going to really give you the truth on what it looks like to get involved in rental property investing, especially when you're buying off-market deals from private sellers with bad tenants. Michael is, I would say, an expert in that because he's done a lot of those. So, Michael, I'm looking forward to getting into today because, and I will say on a positive note, you can get some good deals in New York where you can actually make some real cash flow because the rents are higher here and there's generally more demand for rental product in a major city like the tri-state area in New Jersey, Connecticut, and things like that. So let's just get it kicked off with why most times, Michael, I'll let you handle this first. And why do most rental properties in the tri-state area, why don't they cash flow positive? Because that's the biggest thing. I try to keep a lot of stuff as rentals and I end up flipping it or wholesaling it because I'm like, dude, this makes no sense to keep as a single family rental. Right. So let me have you get into that.
I think it's two major factors. The first is the price point, right? Because there's a lot of our properties here are very expensive, right? You can buy a single family in my area, you're going to pay $400,000 or $500,000 for it. Even if you get it at a discount, you're going to pay $300,000-$400,000 for it. Yep. The debt service on that is usually going to eat up all your rental income. And the second, if not more. Right. And the second thing is the taxes are high in my area where, it's not uncommon to have $1,000 a month or more in property taxes, which you as a landlord have to pay. So between those two things, it's very hard for single families to cash flow positive. There's only a few small pockets in Long Island where you can buy a house, for under $200,000 where it might work.
Where is that, by the way? Seems crazy.
Mastic, Shirley, Bellport, the shittier areas of Long Island. And those areas are getting better. Wyandanch, those areas are actually all improving as people like you and me buy them, fix them up, and sell them to people. But it's hard. So it can work on multi-units. So 2-3 units, those things can work. But it's hard in most of my area for single family properties to cash flow, and it's sad to me, right? Because we know a lot of people who let's say wholesale or flip properties, and they always have this backup if the deal doesn't work, right? If they can't find somebody to wholesale to or somebody to a retail buyer to buy it, hey, I can just throw it on the rental market and they'll be cash flow positive. And that's not an option that you and I have in most of our areas. So for those are the two reasons I say the price point and the debt service that comes with it and the taxes.
That's so true. And the biggest thing I've noticed, you mentioned the taxes. I mean, I bought a property that I'm going to probably actually end up selling this now. There's 4 units and just the taxes alone on that property, including the parking lot, which came with the deal, $11,200. This is in, Orange County, New York. This is not even in like Nassau County. So
it's $1,000
$1,000 a month just for the taxes. That's one unit's rent, right? That's the studio's rent is basically paying the taxes.
Listen, and I have a rental property. I have a 7-unit in Elmont, and I'm not talking about the freaking Fifth Avenue, Manhattan here. My taxes are over $40,000 a year on it.
Are you kidding? On that Elmont the one that you got that was a smoking deal that you did a big lift on?
I got it for under $500,000, and probably worth $1.5 million now. But the taxes are over $40,000. I knew that going in. By the way, and I've tried to reduce them. I've owned it for 5 years. I'm not getting $1 in reduction. But the numbers can still work. Like I don't care if it's $40,000. It doesn't matter to me as long as the numbers work. On this one, the numbers work. It's 7 units. It's a good deal. And people talk about taxes all the time. Even like when you're wholesaling, like I'll look at properties, and I've bought properties where the taxes were $30,000 a year. If it's typical for the area, I don't mind. It's only when it's out of whack for what's there. So if you're buying, like you said, a 4-unit. $11,000 in taxes might be pretty much par for the course. And if one of the units pays for the taxes, then you got to just do the math. If the other 3 units, make it free cash flow to make it make sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So then that's in Nassau County too, in Elmont. Now, in Long Island, you mentioned those two lower end areas, and that I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're listening to the show and you're in an expensive area like Long Island, or even somewhere in the Hudson Valley, or even anywhere, I mean, it's expensive. There's always going to be, like you said, those towns that are more rental friendly from a financial standpoint. And that is where there's a guy that we both know, the handsome home buyer, and he has a lot of properties over there in
He likes
the
He does a lot
Bellport.
in Bellport. It's a
Yeah.
big area for him. But let me tell you what happened in Bellport. I had a lead in Bellport, a guy who had a lot, a buildable lot in Bellport.
Yeah.
And so let me just tell you, this will give you an insight into Bellport. So I actually called Charles, the handsome home buyer, and I'm like, what can I pay for a lot there? And he goes, pretty much nothing. I'm like, what?
Really?
He said, well, it's going to cost 300 grand to build a nice house. And guess what it's worth when you're done? 300 grand. That's
You're done.
it. So new construction there is going to be 300 grand. Maybe it's gone up a little, but like he said to me, like, if you pay more than 10,000 for the lot, it's not a deal. So that was crazy to me. I thought for sure it had some value, but construction costs are what they are. You know, it's cost, even before lumber prices went up like crazy, it was going to cost an experienced builder $250,000 to build a standard, 3,000 square foot house, to 4,000 square foot house. So now that construction prices are higher, it probably costs the same builder, over $300,000.
Yeah, 320. Yeah.
So,
and that's the thing. You got to know your area.
People aren't talking about that now, but now that construction prices have gone up, I'm finding that builders are really scared to buy land because they don't know what their cost to build are going to be.
Totally. Yeah, it's crazy. I did a rehab recently, and we just got 4 or 5 like solid wood base things to bump the house up, to boost it up. That cost me a fortune because lumber freaking quadrupled, and it is what it is. Like, I had to just do it. But the point of that is that you got to know your local area, and there's always going to be those areas that allow you to cash flow positive. So, when it comes to getting involved, Michael, like I know you have a lot of experience, and this is the guy, Charles, got to have him on the show. I really like that guy's stuff. He's got good energy. Yeah. He loves these Section 8 properties. You've gotten involved with them. So let's talk about some programs. And after we talk about the Section 8, we're going to cover the landlord tenant laws in New York and how to buy properties with hair on them with bad tenants. And we'll probably spend a lot of time on the episode talking about that. But before we do that, let's talk about some of these Section 8 programs. And there's other programs that allow the landlord to have more sticky cash flow, because the last thing you want in New York State is a tenant to either stop paying rent or to be paying a low rent to try to do an eviction, because it can get messy.
Sure. So I got my first Section 8 tenant back in 2004, right? I bought my first rental in 2004. And I heard about Section 8, and it sounded like the greatest thing ever. So I then proceeded. It was a 3-family, and I proceeded to move multiple Section 8 tenants through that over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So here's my thoughts on Section 8. First of all,
by the way, what is Section 8?
Let me explain what it is and how it works. So Section 8 is a local housing subsidy, right? So it can come from the county, it can be a state thing, it can be a town thing. In Long Island, there's all these different places. They all might have a different Section 8 office, and it's something where a person qualifies based on need, based on their income, and based on their family size. They qualify for a certain size property, so they might have a voucher for a 3-bedroom if they have a lot of kids, or if they're alone, they might have a voucher for a 1-bedroom. And then they're going to qualify. That Section 8 office is going to sort of give you a standard number. So I think right now for a 2-bedroom, Section 8, I think pays like $1,900, and for a 1-bedroom, it pays like I don't know, 16, 17. I haven't done a 1-bedroom in a long time. So there's pros and cons to it, and I have over the years moved away from Section 8, and primarily because in my area I can get a lot more. My market rents are higher than Section 8s. There are areas, and I'm sure Charles's areas, and I'm sure you'd be happy to tell you that, where Section 8 is pretty much market rent, right? And the areas that we mentioned before, almost everything is Section 8. So if you have a 3-bedroom house, I can tell you it's going to be like $21.68, whatever they're going to pay for a 3-bedroom. That's pretty much what it's going to go for. Now, the advantages to Section 8 is that some portion of the rent, and the way it works is they reassess their income, I think, every quarter, and it changes how much of the rent Section 8 will pay and how much of the rent the tenant is responsible for. They can be responsible for like as much as 50% of the rent, and they can be responsible for like almost nothing, like a zero. They can be responsible for zero, depending on their income. So So that's how Section 8 works. So again, the advantage is you're going to get a check, or I have one Section 8 tenant now, where I get they literally wire ACH into my account every month. So I don't even need to get a check. It's great. But so that's the advantage, that you're getting some money from the government every month. You don't have to collect it. You do have to collect the other portion though.
The balance that the person
balance
owes.
that they're responsible for. And the con is, so there's two negatives to Section 8. The first is that they do pretty heavy inspections on the property annually, certainly before the tenant moves in. And I've had many units where Section 8 just didn't approve it. And for sometimes stupid reason, like a broken light, a switch plate, or something ridiculous. And they do that every year. That's the first problem, that you really have to make sure that it meets the whatever the guidelines that the inspector they send to you is. And the second con is that in general, I think it's a lower quality tenant. Now, I've had great Section 8 tenants, and I've had terrible free market tenants who paid me out of their pocket. But overall, I have a pretty good sampling because I've been doing it for 17 years. I can tell you that I've evicted a significantly higher percentage of my Section 8 tenants for not paying their portion of the rent than I have evicted free market tenants. Now, I'm a pretty good screener. Now I've gotten much better, so I don't do a lot of evictions except for properties that I buy with occupied properties. I'm doing $1 million now, but that's the way I see it. So in my mind, there's pros and cons. They sort of balance out. To me, the question is, am I gonna max out on market rent? So if I'm in an area where Section 8 is very close to market rent, it might be worth those two cons to take that pro of getting that wire every single month. But in my area right now, and I think a lot of areas, and I think people, I can't tell you how many landlords I bought from or deals I've done where the landlords don't even look at what market rent is, and they're charging, they haven't raised people's rent in like 12 years.
It's crazy.
In my area, I can do so much better on a free market than I can with Section 8 that I don't do Section 8. That 110.5 of Section 8 was because I actually had a property. It's a horrible apartment, horrible, tiny, and I couldn't get a free market tenant in there, and I just didn't want to go another month. So I knew I made the call to Section 8. I had a tenant in 5 seconds. So that's the situation with Section 8. So Section 8, I should say another pro. There's another pro and another con. Another advantage of Section 8 is that they are always looking for landlords. There's, I would say, an insatiable supply of people with vouchers in Section 8 that can't find things. So if you need to fill a property and you're not interested in screening tenants, or you're not interested in sitting there and having people write applications, you call Section 8, you'll get 1 million people there. The other con is that, and this happened to me only once, is that if a tenant really knows the way it works, they can screw you over. And what the tenant did in my situation, they pulled up the carpet, they cut out a piece of the flooring and the subflooring. They put the carpet down, they took a picture of it, so there was like an indentation. They said it was an unsafe environment, and they wouldn't let me in to fix it. So Section 8 stopped paying me. It's very rare. It was a weird confluence of events, but it could happen.
Oh my gosh.
So
what a debacle.
Eventually Section 8 made him come in, and I'm like, someone took a saw to this. Like I didn't this wasn't here before. So so that's the other thing. So again, in my opinion, if you can get close to market rent from Section 8, it might be worth and you're good at screening tenants. I mean, it's really important to screen tenants. So we can do a whole show just on screening tenants, because
well, that's my next question for you from a snapshot perspective, and you explained that very well. What do you look for in a tenant? And the reason I'm asking you that question is because I have only bought properties with tenants in place, and I can tell you what, man, having the wrong tenant in your property, it just caused it. And it doesn't, even if you have a manager, that's another, oh, get a property manager and go on vacation. No, they're going to call you when the tenant takes a crap on the freaking floor.
Well, you hope that if you have a property manager, they're going to be good at screening tenants too.
Yes. But, yeah.
So I had a very simple policy that became illegal 2 years ago in New York. My policy was, I used to ask for 2 months security and first month's rent, 3 months. And that was a great filter. It sifted through a lot of the crap. Crappy tenants cannot even imagine saving up 3 months rent, right? They live paycheck to paycheck and they can't. And when I did that, I almost never, so I made a few rules over the years as I learned from it. So my rule was, I made it very clear when I posted it in Craigslist, wherever I did it, 3 months rent. If it's $2,000, it's $6,000. If a tenant said one word about $6,000, I'm talking about if they said, I'll bring you 50 $999 tomorrow, and I'll give you $1 the next day. If they said one word about those 3 months, I immediately disqualified them. I would never rent to them ever, because when I thought back over the people that I evicted, a huge portion of them had some issue with coming up with the 3 months. I'll pay you. I have half of it now. I have half of it next month. Anytime those, so that was my screener. Now it became illegal in the state of New York about 2 years ago to charge more than 1 month's rent, 1 month security. So what I do now is I try to get around it by charging 1 month security, but I want first month and last month's rent. So I try to still do 3 months. To me, that is a huge qualifier. So I say this because I've run tons of credit. I was in the mortgage business for 17 years. I've probably run 10,000 credit reports in my life. So the tenants that I noticed, their credit didn't really affect whether they'd be a good tenant or not. A lot of good tenants also had bad credit. You want to check their income. You want to see that they have a job, something steady,
consistent paydays, basically.
Right, but even that is hard to know, right? Because it's hard. Some people, to me, the ultimate check that I use for screening is, have they been able to save up some cash? I'm not saying it works 100% of the time, but I'd say it worked 99% of the time. And also, if they said a word about it, I'm talking about a word about it. To me, it was always an indicator that there was some kind of issue.
Yeah, and if they give you that resistance, there's probably a reason they're giving you that resistance. That's so funny you say that, because the guy that you met today, Joe Finneran, we got to get him on the show, by the way. He's good. That guy's hilarious, dude. He's ridiculous. By the way, you got to see his house. I'll just leave it there.
Does he live in Middletown?
He lives in the Middletown area, but he bought this basically castle at like a ridiculous discount. And I might be going there after this podcast.
Good for him.
That's just ridiculous. Lives there by himself. It's awesome. Anyway, so he actually, to go into that, I wholesaled him a house a couple years ago in Port Jervis, which is a very low income area. And, we did well on it. He bought a good deal, and all is well. And he rented to a tenant who ended up, there was like a shooting down the street, and they ran into his property, and it turned into this whole disaster. There's drug dealers and gangsters. It was this whole disaster. So he was like, man, I just can't find good tenants anymore up there. And he actually came up with a new rule where what he does, and this will go along with what you said, he actually hires a real estate agent to lease the property, and the tenant has to pay the real estate agent a month's worth of rent out of their pocket. And that's his barrier to entry. And now he has much better tenants in that specific city, because it creates that, like, they got to want it financially bad enough to want to get there. And the more resistance,
not just want it financially, but be able to afford it.
Be able to afford it. Yeah. Like financially, to really be able to get that property, because especially with the way that rentals are in these high end areas, like it's, they're scarce sometimes. People want properties to live in. Obviously they need a place to live. So the more barriers you can create legally, the better. So as we transition now into the main, I guess, meat and potatoes, is if you're in the off-market real estate business, buying houses off sellers directly, you're going to run into leads where they have non-paying tenants. And that, I hear the word non-paying tenant, I almost hear a cash register ring in my head.
Me too.
So I'll start with a story, because Frank Kern taught me how to use stories to make points. And I got a lead, and it was crazy how it came in. She actually sent me return mail. She sent me a snail mail letter, and I didn't live in New York. And I was back there for something, and I remember going through the mail, and I saw this letter addressed to me, and I opened it up, and she was like, "Hi, this is Gertrude," was her name, and she's like, "I live in Virginia. I own this property in Middletown." I literally wholesaled the house to Frank Sanchez right down the street.
How'd she get to you? You had sent her a postcard?
I sent her a mailer, and then she mailed me back.
Responded with mail. I get that. Every time, by the way, every time I've gotten response mail, it's like
this. Yeah, it's like F off.
We're gonna die here.
If people aren't watching it, I gave the middle finger. Yeah. I'm never selling, even though I haven't paid my taxes in 3 years. So anyway, so she snail mails me, and I'm looking through it, and she's like, she writes me a letter. She's like, "Hey, I'm interested." So I knew this property because I wholesaled the house literally down the street to Frank, like right down the road, made a killing on it. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. So this is how she told me to communicate with her. She says, "Email me if you're interested." So I fire up an email, and I send it to her. I'm like, "Hi, I got your message." And she really only wanted to communicate through email for the most part. So I made her an offer. She rejected it. And then she followed up with me last year, and she's like, "Hey, do you still want the property?" I'm like, "Yes, only if I can get it for this price." She's like, "I'll sell it to you. You can't go in the property, can't talk to the tenants. I'm never going to meet you. I'm in Virginia. You're out in San Diego. The house is in Middletown, but I'll sell it to you at that price if you just buy it sight unseen. And there are tenants in there. They've been there for a while. They're not paying a lot of rent. Don't mess with them until you own it." So I said, "Okay, fine." I said, "As long as you're okay with that price," she made me put a huge deposit down. and I closed on it, never saw it. I knocked on the door day one, and I flew back there, and it's been a battle ever since, to say the least. So these tenants have been very tough to deal with so far, now that we're actually doing an eviction now. So the point of that story is that you got to know what you're getting into when you're dealing with tenants who are either or even sometimes even worse, they've been there for a while and they're not paying anywhere near market rent. And it's going to be impossible for them to leave for the most part, because there's nowhere else in the world they're going to get a deal like that.
I would venture,
and that gets a piss.
I would venture to say that it's better than not paying, because then they're paying zero. And
Yeah, that's true. But it's easier to evict when they're not paying. You know what I mean? Sort of. Anyway, I'll let you get into that because you're the expert.
Okay, so I know how things work in my county, in Nassau County. I have personally probably done 50 evictions myself, right? Because in the beginning, when I started buying properties, I bought them in my own name, which is stupid. I didn't know it was stupid.
Wow. Yeah. Michael Pinter as the buyer.
But the good part about buying a property in your own name is that
you don't need an attorney.
Do the eviction pro se. I can do the eviction without an attorney.
Yeah.
That was good, because I learned how the whole eviction process worked. And I can honestly say I'm better than pretty much any attorney at making it go as quick as possible. The only hard part is that when it actually comes to going to court, they take the attorneys first before the people. So I'd have to spend a day sitting there waiting for them to call my name. But attorneys are not as good at evictions as I am personally in my county. But so the way it works with evictions, there's two types of evictions. There's a non-payment eviction and there's a holdover eviction. Non-payment means you're paying them for not paying, and holdover means that you're not asking for money, but they've been there too long and you want to get them out. What I've learned through the years is that you're almost never, even if I've collected many judgments against tenants for not paying, and I've never ever seen a dime from it ever. So the only thing that you really care about is to get them out. That's it.
Yes.
So so another example, and this is different in every part of New York. If it's there are plenty of illegal apartments, right? Basement apartments.
Yeah.
So I remember there was one judge for the whole Nassau County. He was great. His name was Scott Fairgrave. They just forced him to retire at age 70, and he would say, like, you could tell him it's a basement apartment. He would just say, okay, you have a choice. Then you can either get payment or you can get a warrant for possession, which means eviction. So I would always just say evict. I just want them out. I'm never going to get the money anyway. So, but the basic process, and I think everywhere, is that you have to give the tenant notice to leave, right? Assuming
process serve them, you have to do it a specific way to the letter, or else it gets reneged.
Right. So also you can't do anything if somebody's on the lease. I'm about to go into contract on something where there's two tenants that are leased until December. So I can't evict them until the lease is up. I'm going to try and offer them money to leave early, but if they don't want to, they can stay. So once they don't, if they're not leased, you basically have to give them notice that I want you to leave. And a lot of the laws have changed recently, but I think you pretty much have to give at least 30-day notice. It used to be that you had to give it before the end of the month, before the next calendar month. Now I think it's a little more lenient about when you give it, but you should speak to an attorney about that, because a lot of these laws changed over the last 2 years.
I've stayed in the property for it too.
What?
I said you have to. It depends on how long they've been in the property for.
Right. So the amount of notice you give them is dependent on that. And then after they don't leave, when the notice is up, then you have to get a court date, and you have to go to the court. And if you don't know how to do this, you certainly use an attorney for this. Get a court date, and they really have to be process served between a certain amount of time before the court date. And you can't process serve them too early, and you can't process serve them too late. They have to be served in a certain thing. I think it's between 5 and 10 days. It used to be between 5 and 12 days. Whatever it is, I can tell you from sitting through many, many court dates that the number one reason that the cases get kicked out is because they screwed up the service. So like I probably saw this 100 times, where the guy goes, you served them too early. And the guy goes, what's the problem? I gave them extra notice. And he goes, that's not the way it works. Dismiss. Start from scratch. And that's how it works. So it's very important to use an experienced process server that knows how to serve, when to serve, and will testify in court if the guy says he wasn't served. So that's a really big thing. You have to process them to the court, and then it goes to court. So the way it works in Nassau, I think it works in a lot of areas, is that they do not want to go to trial. They want you to work it out with the tenant. So first they send you to a mediator. And the mediators are very fair people. And the mediators are just trying to get you to some agreement where you'll avoid going to court. Now, what most deadbeat tenants think is that if I agree to anything with this mediator, I'm kicking this can months down the line. What is beautiful is that, and again, this is Nassau, is you have to sign a stipulation, then you have to go in front of the judge. The judge says, did you read this? Do you agree to it? And the guy has to say under oath, yes. If they don't follow what they said in that stipulation, so I'll get them to give me some money right away, and then like extra money every month with the current rent. I try to listen, I'm trying to get them out. So I try to collect some money now, and then I'm trying to put them in a situation where they're going to default on this, maybe in a month or two. And then I don't have to go to court anymore. I could just send in an affidavit of noncompliance, which is it's a notarized statement saying, this guy said on this stip he was going to pay me $3,000 last month, and he hasn't. And you send it in, and that's it. And usually what happens then is you get an order for possession, which means that you are going to get the property. And then you have to deal with the sheriff in Nassau. So you have to go to the sheriff and you've got to pay him a few $100. And the stupidest part, and I don't know if this is everywhere in New York, but I know it's in Nassau, I have to hire a moving company to take out all these guys' possessions, the tenant's possessions, and store it for 30 days. I don't have to pay for that until the actual eviction, but I have to show the sheriff that I have a mover ready to go, and they have to show the mover's insurance and all that crap. Now, the whole process up to the eviction is not that expensive. I mean, your attorney may charge you $1,000, $1,500, but all the court fees and all the other fees is a few $100. But in Nassau, so then the sheriff will give you a date, and sometimes they're quick and sometimes they're slow, but they then inform the tenant 72 hours, 3 days before the eviction that we're coming in 3 days. Now, I found
in 3 days.
3 days, and they post it.
And they'll knock on the door and they'll just
like
get
in 3 days,
out.
you're over. Now, sometimes they'll get an attorney at that point, and they'll send an order to show cause, some stupid thing. They can delay it a little if they have real reason, like if you made the mistake of collecting rent.
Yeah, that's a no-no. Yeah.
Yeah, once you start the eviction process, you're not getting it. But usually they'll leave when they get to 72
collect rent. No,
I find probably 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 4 will leave then. But if it actually goes to the eviction, and I've actually been present at many evictions, then it gets expensive because you might have to pay a mover a couple of $1,000. Depends on how big the apartment
is. Like $2,000. It's $2,000 usually, at least $2,000.
Depends how big it is. I've done a whole house where it was like $4,000.
Oh,
it needed like 3 trucks worth of stuff, and it was all crap that was going to get thrown out. But it doesn't matter; you still have to pay for it. So that's the only part that gets expensive, and then that's it. And that's the eviction process. You hope that you don't go to the end. But when I buy something with a non-cooperative tenant, I start calculating how long is this going to take, how much is it going to cost me every month to hold it, how much is it going to cost me to go to the end eviction, and then I try and figure out what I can pay them so that I can avoid that worst case scenario.
Yeah,
I always offer money first, always.
Oh, totally. That's the logical thing the tenant should consider.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they run they reverse engineer how long it's going to take for them to get out versus what they're going to get in cash. And they're just like, well, fuck it, I'll just stay. Right. There's 2 things, Michael, you mentioned to me, and I mentioned this on one of my other podcasts. And there's always 2 things that tenants tell you that give the landlord happy ears. Michael, what are those 2 things? Because they are both complete, I'm saying this for the record, bullshit.
So
what are they?
And I know this because I've fallen for it so many times until I realized.
Me too. Trust me. Yeah.
Number 1 is they say, I want to buy the house. Right, which is always comical. And I have probably bought 5 or 6 houses from people who told me, tenant has been paying rent, but he told me he was supposed to buy the house a year and a half ago. And
and it didn't work out.
Issues with his mortgage. I'm like, issues with mortgage. His credit is probably shit. And he has no income. So that's number 1. I'm trying to buy the house. And number 2 is I'm ready to go. I just need to find some place to go.
Oh, even better. Even better.
Ironically, today, that might be true on some level because there's a crazy artificial shortage of supply due to the eviction moratorium and the foreclosure moratorium. But in general, when things are normal, if you want to find a place to go, you can go.
You're going to find a way out. If you found a way in, you'll find a way out.
Exactly. So those are the 2 things that tenants say that you need to, as a landlord, honestly, completely 1000% discount in your mind to know that this is just not true. And by the way, whatever a tenant says to me, I don't believe, and I will always continue with the eviction process. A lot of times they just want to stall. So a tenant tells me I'm leaving in 2 months. You don't need to evict me. Don't worry. I'm still starting the eviction process. And I tell them,
100%.
I say, that's fine. If you're out in 2 months, this is not going to be a problem, but you're going to get served at the end of this month, by the end of this month, that I am going through eviction just in case you're not out in 2 months. So I never believe anything any tenant tells you ever that you're trying to get out, ever.
100%, ever. And they're always gonna, it's the thing with tenants I've noticed is that at least the ones that I've interacted with, and you've interacted with more of them, they're, at least the tenants who are not paying a lot in rent or not paying in general, they're natural procrastinators.
Yeah. So
right, it's
I
kind of
like
like
to say that
sellers, like they're naturally procrastinators.
inertia is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And somebody who is sitting in a property, especially if they're not paying rent or they're paying below market rent, they do not want to move.
No.
Right? So I don't know if we were going to bring this up, but I have found a very good tactic that I use to buy properties that are occupied, because what I find is that not most, but a lot of landlords are very concerned if you're going to go come see a property with a tenant in there, that the tenant is going to stop paying rent or get angry at them or something.
Yep.
So what I do is I say, you don't have to tell a tenant that you're selling the property. Just tell them the insurance company needs to do a quick inspection. I'll be in and out of there in 5 minutes. I bought a hat on eBay. I'll show you.
No way. You got an insurance hat.
Guardian Inspection Services. I wear this hat, and I made up business cards too. I made up business cards to match with my cell phone on it. So that's what I do, and it works. I mean, I'd say once in a while you get a tenant who's like really suspicious because they are onto something, but that's a big deal. If you want to buy houses that are occupied, I can't tell you how many times I hear my leads manager. I have to keep telling her. The leads manager calls a seller, and the seller says, I have a tenant in there. And the leads manager goes, okay. And the seller says, okay, I'm just going to tell her that I'm thinking about selling it. It's a huge mistake and I'll call the seller back and I go, it's not in your best interest to let the tenant know that you're thinking about selling it. Do not let them know. I go, they may stop paying rent. They may have a completely different attitude towards you. Do not let them know, and just let me go in there as an insurance inspector for 5 minutes. And that's all I need. So
dude, that hat might have been the funniest thing I've seen all day, dude. Guardian Inspection.
My son duplicated the logo, so on the business card.
Oh my gosh. So it's true though. You got it. It's funny you say that, because I was at a house yesterday and the guy has his son living there, and like he was a little suspicious about what was going on, and you don't want to like answer them because you're like, yeah, I'm just looking at the property. But I've found that that when you get a tenant, especially a tenant who's getting a good deal or not paying shit, if you get them thinking that they're going to have to leave based on the law of inertia, they're going to just burn down the house. Not literally, obviously, hopefully not.
And they can control whether you ever get inside there or not.
Oh yeah.
It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And I've had to educate some sellers on it. The seller's like, well, I can sell the house if I want to. I go, you can do whatever you want. I said, but if you want the tenant to continue to pay, or you want the tenant to be cooperative, do not let on that you're selling. It's a mistake. No. I'm saying, and I usually give these sellers, I'll give them two prices, right? I'll give them a higher price if they give it to me vacant, and a lower price if they give it to me with a tenant, because I figure I'm gonna have to pay to get the tenant out.
Totally.
So, if you
I just did that on a house. It's funny you say that.
Tell me it's no problem. I can get them out when I want. I go, fine. I go, then take more money for it and get the tenant out. I prefer to get it vacant. I said, but it's not as simple as you think.
Yeah, totally. It's funny you said that. I've been in escrow on this property in Newburgh forever, and we're gonna buy it with a tenant, and then the tenant was like, I'm like, this is gonna be a disaster.
Let me just stop you right there. You're not in California anymore. There's no in escrow. You're in contract in New York. Okay. In
contract. Sorry. So I'm in contract, and the guy was like, I'm like, I'll take it with a tenant. And then the tenant was like, I'm in the middle of dealing with two bad tenants and a vacant building. And now another tenant, I'm like, ooh, I don't want another one of these in my plate right now. I said, listen, Dave, I'll buy it with a tenant if you sell or finance me the property with $10,000 down, or I'll give you 10 grand more and you get the tenant out. And the tenant's going to generally cooperate a little bit better. I have found, at least from this encounter, the tenant's actually moving out now. Like, that's a legitimate thing. And we're just going to close in a couple weeks. But for some reason, in this case, the seller had a better control over the tenant moving versus me. For some reason, I don't know why, but apparently it worked.
There are some tenants who, if you tell them you got to move, are just going to say, "Okay, I'm out of here."
I'm out of here.
Tenants, yeah, there are good tenants and good people who say, "I'll find another place and I'll go." And then there are tenants who, no matter who tells them to leave, they're telling you, "I'm not going anywhere."
Exactly. So the big thing we're trying to make on this podcast in this episode is that if you're going to get involved either in NYREI rental properties, or you're going to just be buying rental properties in New York in general, especially down in the tri-state area when you're south of like Ulster County and out in Long Island, you got to know what you're getting into, and you really need to know your market. You got to know the rents by knowing about Section 8, and you also got to know how to do an eviction, because I guarantee you, if you've been in this business more than 5 years and you have, like, some guys only wholesale, but if you bought a house before, you're going to do an eviction. Whether you want to do an eviction to flip the house, or you're going to do an eviction to rent the house at market value, you're going to have to do an eviction. And you're going to have to understand how it works, even if you're not going to do the eviction yourself. So, Michael, as we start to wrap the show up here.
By the way, let me just stop you, but I was talking about doing eviction myself. I personally think that everybody should have a good eviction attorney.
Oh, you have to. You have to. You have to.
Please, I beg of you, pick an attorney who specializes in landlord-tenant law, who represents tenants and represents landlords. Do not pick your cousin who is a bankruptcy attorney and heard how evictions are done. I've seen people do that. I bought properties from a lot of people who did that. In fact, I just bought, I'm wholesaling a property tomorrow where she had a horrible attorney who did a horrible job on the eviction, and the guy hasn't paid rent in 2.5 years.
Oh no.
I'm wholesaling.
You're wholesaling it with a tenant in place?
Yeah.
Big spread?
Not as big as I wanted, but I think it's a $50,000 deal.
$50,000 spread?
$50,000 spread.
That's a ridiculously good wholesale deal.
Let me tell you something. It's a good wholesale deal, but I honestly thought about keeping it because the price that the guy's getting it is probably $200,000 less than market value.
Oh wow! What was it? A multi-unit?
No, it's a single family, but it's in a really good area.
Where is it? What area?
It's called Greenvale.
Is that in Suffolk County?
No, it's Nassau. I had never heard of it, but it's right around Roslyn Harbor, which is like a mansion, beautiful area.
Mansion, yeah.
I'm talking about $5 million houses, and this is like a tiny little area where it's got it's in like one of the number one or number 2 school district in New York State, the Roslyn schools. So a lot of people want to move there, and the house is in good shape, but it's got a tenant who is going to rip you through the ringer, and it's in a horrible municipality. It's a town in North Hempstead, and it's got open permits, and that's going
to. So it's just a bloodbath.
It might take 1.5 years to get everything done, but this guy is going to make money when it's done.
Yeah,
it's a super area. But for me, I just didn't want to wait for 2 years and fight.
Yeah, carry that building. Yeah. You got to know the market. You got to know what you're getting into. So if you're going to do rentals here, you got to know the cities, the rents, how to evict people. And you got to take this. I was telling you, I was coaching this guy yesterday, just a buddy of mine. We went and looked at a house, and I'm like, listen, dude, I know you're getting a lot of information from guys online, and they're all great. Michael and I are friends with them. But you got to understand, in this area, you need to connect with people doing the business in the market, whether they live there or they don't live there. They got to be doing active business in New York. And it gave him some clarity, because he was like thinking, I'm like, dude, like, this is how it goes down here. You got to take your information from people who are doing deals in your area or in the state. So you got to know who you're taking your information from. And you can take information from other people, right? But you got to put a grain of salt on it and make sure you can confirm that or find out the truth on someone who's, and then this could go in any area. Like if you're in Dallas or if you're in San Diego, it doesn't matter. It's every area is going to be different. And a lot of, I see some bad advice out there where it's like, you don't need to know anything about real estate. Just go out and get deals. It's like, nah, it's not really true, because if you're not an expert and you're not a master of your craft, you're going to end yourself up in a lawsuit. And then you're going to get fucked.
Or even worse, you're not going to end up with any business. I can tell you that there are people out there who are getting information from people in other states, and they're going to seller appointments with a contract, passing it across the table and saying, can I give you a check for $50? And the seller's looking at them like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
My attorney needs to drop the contract. $50 is about $30,000 less than I'm expecting you to give me. And why are you asking for an inspection contingency when that's not how it works in New York?
Yep, exactly, man. Exactly. That's why I listen to the show. So I hope the listeners got value today. If you did get value, which I'm sure you did today, if you're looking to buy rental properties around here, leave a review, leave a rating. Also share the show with people who need to hear this, and we will see everybody on the next episode.